this gospel for protection. It's a hard road.
Luke Darren Waller. I think that's the name, right, Darren?
Or is it Derek?
Derek.
I don't know. Something Waller.
I need Waller to catch one pass.
From the Raiders.
One pass.
Chiefs could kill the Raiders as long as Waller catches one pass.
I don't care.
You don't care?
I don't care about either team. I just need Waller to catch one pass because I
need Travis Kelce to have a game of his life.
Man,
not really. I just need Travis Kelce to do better than Devontae Adams
by 7 points.
By 7 points.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Man, fantasy football.
If I win this week, I'm 5-0 on the season.
If I win this week, I'm 1-4.
1-4. Last week I thought you were going to beat me.
Man, I've gone into Monday Night Football the last 5 weeks thinking, oh man, this is fine.
Last week you had your QB and your kicker.
Yep.
And I won by, I think, 10 points. Mm-hmm. And you were up. Did I even play on Monday night last week?
I can't remember.
It was the Rams and who played?
I can't remember.
I don't remember. I need Jonathan North to tell me who played last week.
All I know is I finally pulled that quarterback that's
and then he has a good week.
Remain nameless, and he has the best week of this season.
He has something wrong with his head bone.
Man, I swear. Oh, man.
Fantasy football.
Fantasy football.
It's one of those things you can act like you have a great team, like you're this amazing manager or something. Bro, it's nothing you do. It's luck. It's just a matter of if your team decides, your players
100%.
decide to have a good week.
100%.
I had number one pick this year.
Yep.
Draft Jonathan Taylor. What's he done? Nothing.
Dud.
Absolutely nothing. And I'm like, come on, man. Enough of fantasy football. I'm gonna get a little heated.
Well, and here. I mean the same for me. I had the third pick, and I picked Eckler.
Yeah.
Now the last 2 weeks,
he's been good.
He's been what he was last season.
Yeah.
So it's kind of starting to level out.
He's hit and miss. I feel
but
like sometimes.
Before that, it was rough.
Yeah.
And then I trade you.
Yeah, and then Tua gets freaking injured,
and then Tua gets hurt. And then Cordell Patterson gets hurt. So the person who I was going to replace my running back with,
that I traded you for,
that you traded me for,
I almost offered to trade for Patterson, but I said, "Nah, I'm not going to take him. He's having a good season." Right. And he gets injured on you. Everybody wish I did take him.
Everybody's injured.
Yeah,
everybody's injured.
It's okay. The guy I traded you for gave me, I think, 5 points this week. So it's
Connor.
Like yeah,
he's been hit and miss.
He's not missing anything.
He'll have a 20-point game next week, though.
Probably.
I mean,
I have a wide receiver from his team on my team. He had like a 25-point game. So.
I had Ertz.
Yeah,
I got Ertz on my team, and he put up 11. So I'm hoping all I need is one.
I have DeAndre
I'm literally
Hopkins,
losing by 0.7 points right now.
Points.
It can be a negative catch.
You just need him to catch the ball. That's 1 point.
Catch the ball.
That's just 1 point, and every yard after counts for a point, like point.
A tenth of a point.
Yeah, a tenth of a point, whatever it is. Yeah.
I just need.
I just
need a catch.
Just a catch. It could be just a negative yard, just as long as it's better than 0.6.
Yeah.
So just don't lose 4 yards.
Right. I just need a catch.
Yeah, just a catch.
Just catch the ball.
Yeah. Fantasy football.
So what did you preach about?
So last week this week I talked about shame.
Okay.
Shame is so the Devil's Games wants us to play shame.
Right.
And I started off the sermon by talking about the difference between guilt and shame.
Okay.
Guilt is I did something bad.
Right.
Like I messed up. I did something I wasn't supposed to do.
Gotcha.
Shame is I am bad. You take on that emotion. You say I'm always bad. I'm always going to be the same. I'm always going to be this past mistake. That's shame. I'm bad.
Right.
So that's where I started the sermon with, talking about the difference between guilt and shame. And I feel like we all, if we're not careful, when we do something bad, we can let guilt turn to shame very quickly. Very easily. Like I share kind of my personal testimony through it, like how I started off doing something, and instead of nipping it, like I grew up in church. I grew up where I felt like I had to be perfect. I felt like I had to live up to this standard. And because of that, I never told anyone about my struggles.
Right.
And I let those struggles go on for 6-7 years, something like that.
Right.
Of not telling anybody. And through that course, I let shame creep in. And then I talked about, so there's this thing called shame-based thinking. I stole this from Craig Rochelle. But I thought it worked really well. So shame-based thinking, the first one is you become perfectionist. Like you try to put on the front that you're perfect, nothing's going wrong, you got your whole life together, you got your image. And that's where I was for the longest time in my life. I put on a perfect front. Then the second one is you get overly critical of yourself, but in the process of you being critical of yourself, you get critical of others.
Right.
And with that, it's like you're critical of yourself, and whenever you come in contact with someone else, you get critical of what they're going through. And then you see the negative of yourself and them, and you get critical of what they're doing. You're like, man, I wish they wouldn't talk to me that way. I wish they wouldn't, whatever it may be. You get overcritical.
Yeah.
Like I told these teenagers, I'm like, you're going to, like, you don't realize, like, maybe you're critical of maybe a coach or a teacher, but eventually whenever you get into adulthood, it's going to be your boss. You're going to be critical of, like, man, my boss always wants me to work these hours, always wants me to do this or do that. And, like, I never get any credit or whatever it may be. Like, you become critical of something because you're overly critical of yourself.
Right.
But so that was the second shame-based thinking. The third was begin protecting yourself from negativity. Like you when someone offers you something, you look at the negative immediately. You say, no, I don't want to take that risk because I could fail here, here, and here, and here. And you don't allow yourself to take a risk because you're so worried about the negative, the disappointment that you're going to experience.
Yeah.
So, and I was like, doing that, you're missing out on a whole life that God has for you because you're so worried about the negative. You're so worried about going through the process of whatever it may be. Like, shame is like one of those things that the devil, if he knows he can creep in with shame, he's going to keep you there for however long until you come to a point where you're done with shame. So I built up this thing of, like, I told my story where I dealt with shame and I got the tension there. I felt like, and then I talked about the Israelites.
Right.
Like they were slaves for 30 years, 40 years, something like that.
Right.
Like,
well, and which time? I mean,
the first, like when they first, like after Joseph was there, he was like, we talk about Joseph this week, so I'm not going to try to go too much into Joseph right now. But Joseph came in, like he was sold into slavery to the Egyptians. And then while he was there, he had a dream, like got out of prison. I'm very brief here, but then he like helps the Israelites because there's a famine in the land.
Yep.
And then after that, the Israelites become indebted to the Egyptians. And then because they're indebted, they become slaves. That's the only way that they can pay off the debt that they owe to Egypt. So I talk about how they were in slavery for 400 and something years. I can't remember the exact amount right now. But they were enslaved. And then finally God said, I'm sick of this. All right, Moses, like I talked about the burning bush, Moses, you go to Egyptians, and tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go.
Right.
And like Moses, first off, Moses was dealing with shame at that point too, because he just murdered an Egyptian. And not only that, but the Israelites turned their back on him because they're like, you're supposed to be one of our kind. If you're doing that to the people who took you in, adopted you, called you their own, and you're murdering them.
Yeah, man. So Moses, he had a rough time with this, man.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't liked by the Israelites because he was living with the king.
He was living the
life.
Royalty life.
So then he sees his adopted people harming one of his native people.
Yep.
And he kills them. And now they still don't like him.
Yeah.
Because they're like, well, man, if you kill your own people, what does that mean you're going to do to us?
Yeah.
He can't win.
No.
So
he runs.
Crazy situation.
He runs.
He hides.
Hides from that life, and eventually he's just out shepherding, doing what he's supposed to do, taking care of his like in-laws, cattle, sheep, whatever it may be, whatever they had at that time.
Right.
In a burning bush, God comes to him and says, "Moses, I want you to go, let my people go. Tell Pharaoh to let them go." Like, who sent me? I am who I am sent.
Right. Man, what was his response though?
I can't.
Have you considered my brother?
Yeah, have you considered my brother? I can't talk.
I don't talk good.
I don't talk good. I don't talk good.
Yeah.
Like he
had
legit
a stutter.
had a stutter problem.
Yep.
And I think like not only like did Moses like realize his like qualities that he didn't have,
right?
But he was like questioning like his like, am I qualified to do this?
Right.
God, are you sure? God, do you know what I did in my past?
What about my brother?
What about my brother? He's a stand-up guy. He's a good public speaker.
Yep.
He enjoys talking to people.
He's got it all together.
Yeah, he has the look.
He's a priest.
Yeah.
You know.
Have you considered him?
Have you considered my
And
brother?
God said, No.
Am I talking to your brother?
I'm not. I'm talking to you.
Right.
If I wanted him, I would have told him. But
Right.
I want you. But also, God was gracious enough. He's like, okay, you want your brother. Fine, your brother can go with you.
Yeah.
You can be your spokesperson, but I want you to be the one to lead the charge.
Right.
To lead the people out
Yep.
of Egypt.
So, man, I'm going to kind of
You're good.
sidetrack a little bit. God always uses people that will make it undoubtedly evident that God was there.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
Because people would say Moses.
Right.
Wasn't that the
What?
guy who ran away?
Right.
Isn't that the guy that murdered somebody?
Aaron makes sense.
Yeah. He was a priest.
Right. In my opinion, I think Samson was an average sized person. I don't think he was massive.
Wasn't like
if he was-
Goliath or anything.
Yeah, because if he was massive, then all the stuff that he did could be attributed to just his sheer size.
Yeah.
You know, he always picks people to like kind of show off in.
Well, he used like Peter.
in the outcast.
Yeah.
Right.
Used Peter. Used Paul,
Yeah.
a murderer.
Yep. Murdered Christians and then
Used-
became
Yeah.
like the leading force in getting the gospel to the Gentiles.
Yeah. And then David, like he used a young boy who
Yep.
wasn't even supposed to be at.
John the Baptist
Yeah.
lived in the wilderness.
Like he uses people who are the unlikely
Yeah.
people, the unlikely characters.
Because when he uses them, it's obvious
Yeah.
that God is doing something.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Because if it's the golden boy, then everybody can chalk that up to,
yeah.
he's just successful.
Yep.
He uses the people that are outcasts. I mean, for
Yeah.
lack of a better term. So if you feel like that,
You're in good company.
don't count yourself out.
Yeah.
Don't count yourself out, and definitely don't count God out.
For sure. Yeah. So Moses goes to Egypt, goes to
Right.
Pharaoh, let my people go.
Right.
Pharaoh doesn't do it. What, 10 times? 9?
Yep.
Yeah, 10 times.
Yep.
Doesn't do it. And finally, the Passover happens.
Mm-hmm.
Pharaoh's firstborn son dies.
Yep.
And Pharaoh, out of anger, rage,
Get out of here.
probably a lot of profanity, get out of here.
Yep.
Like, Pharaoh was not a good person. He was an evil
Right.
person. God said his heart was hardened
Yep.
to the things of God.
Yep.
So we know he was just a bad dude. So for him to tell them
Right.
to leave, he was
He was just done.
done.
It wasn't a you can leave.
No, it was like
It was a
you
get out of my sight.
Get the heck out of here, basically.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
nicest way I can put it.
Right.
Like you think of the argument you're having with someone, and they're like, "Leave."
Yeah.
That's what this was. He said, "There's the door. Get
Right.
going before I change my mind, and I just murder all of you.
Right.
Just go."
Yep.
So we see this happen. They're on the run, and eventually the Israelites, they come to a point where they're at the Red Sea.
Red Sea. Yep.
Red Sea.
Yep.
And they're to a point like, Moses, how are we going to cross this?
Got the army behind us and a sea in front of us.
Yep. How are we going to get through this? How are we
Talk about a rock and a hard place,
Yeah.
man.
And they're questioning, Moses, where are you leading us to?
Did you just lead us out here to die?
Did we just leave us out here to die? Should we have stayed in Egypt? We had food.
Yep.
We had water.
Maybe if we just
We had a
don't fight
bed.
them, they'll take us back.
Yeah. And they had the mindset of a slave.
Yep.
And so many times I feel like Christians live to the slave of their sin,
Oh, yeah.
the slave of their shame, just
Right.
like the Israelites. That's because that's all they knew.
Mm-hmm.
All they knew was being a slave.
Right.
And so for some people, all they know is the shame that they feel because of the sin that they committed.
Honestly, that's why part of the reason why I think they had to be in the wilderness for as long as they did.
Oh,
because
yeah.
that entire generation passed.
Yep.
He had to get that. God had to get the mindset out of the people
Yep.
before he could let the people into the promised land.
Yeah.
Because you can't. I'm talking with a friend, and one of the things that he said is you always want to go out of a season the way that you want to go into the next.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it.
Mm-hmm.
If they would have went into the promised land feeling like slaves,
They would have been there like slaves.
they would have went in and acted
They probably
like
would have. They
slaves
would have probably been conquered by the first city that they faced,
immediately.
Jericho.
Immediately.
They probably, yeah,
They didn't want to fight Jericho anyway, except
No.
for Joshua and Caleb.
yeah,
Those were the only two that said, we can do this. God's on our side. Everybody else said, man, they're too big.
yeah,
Think if they would have been slaves and still gone in there.
Mm-hmm.
They would have said, well, maybe we can go in and make a deal.
yeah,
You know what I
Yeah.
like? You have to go into it with the mindset that you want to be in.
yeah.
You have to. You absolutely have to.
And then for how I closed out like that. I didn't close out the story because I come back to that.
Right.
Come back to Joshua. I talk about that, like how God led them, how he
Right.
led Joshua into going into the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
But before I got there, I talked about the only way that we can heal from shame is to move the focus from what I am not to who Christ is.
Right.
Because for as long as we focus on what we're not, like I'm never going to meet this. I'm always a bad
Right.
person. I'm always doing something that's wrong. I never do the
Yeah.
right thing. If I always focus on what I am not, we're never going to live in the true freedom that Christ has for us.
Right.
And so going from there, I went through Hebrews 12, verse 2, where it talks about Jesus. Like this is Hebrews 12 is the like Hall of Fame of faith.
Yep, yep.
And it starts off by talking about Jesus, what Jesus has done. Like he endured the cross. He endured everything. He disregarded, loathed shame on the cross for us to find freedom in him.
Right.
And like we can't do it on our own.
Right.
We have to go to Jesus. We have to say, Jesus, I messed up. I'm a sinner. I'm dealing with shame. And Jesus will help you renew your mind. It isn't like an instant change. It isn't like one day all of a sudden you're like, you know what? I used to think I was a bad person, but now, you know what? I'm a good person. It isn't
Right.
like an overnight change. It's over time you begin to see yourself in a different light.
Right.
The actions, the fruits that your life
You have
begins
to
to
let
bear.
the slave die.
Yeah. Got to let them go.
You have to let it die,
And that
man.
goes back to the Israelites.
Yep.
I talked about it took another 400 years of them in the wilderness, something like that.
40.
40.
Yep. 40
Another
years.
40 years in the wilderness.
But it's so if you go on Google Maps and
Yep, they just did a big
and,
circle.
and do a walk.
Yep.
Like if you set, wherever in Egypt to Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
like or even like if you set it as a walk, it's like 10 days. It's a 10-day walk and it took them 40 years
40 years just wandering.
wandering.
But how long was it from them when they left Egypt and that they sent the spies into the promised land? Do you
I don't
remember the time frame?
remember that off the top of
I
my
can't
head.
either.
It was 40 years that they were there before they went into the promised land. Mm-hmm. And even Moses didn't get to go in.
No, yeah. Well, he did some things that,
He did.
yeah. He responded out of anger
Yep.
at times.
Yep.
And God said,
But God, man, he's still gracious. He let him see it.
you let him see it at least.
He let him see it, but he wouldn't let
Wouldn't
him
let
in.
him lead
Yep.
the people in.
Yep.
So it comes to Joshua
Right.
and Caleb were the two that went in to spy.
Not even, but again, they weren't born in Egypt.
No.
They were born in the wilderness.
Yep.
All they know is the fight.
Yep. And they
You know what I
said,
mean?
we can do it.
We can do this.
And then God made a promise to Joshua that
Right.
he would lead them.
Yep.
And then in Joshua 5:9 it says, then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt.
Right.
Like God has said, the shame that you had of slavery is no more. You are a free people. The shame is gone. It's been rolled away. Shame off of you. Go into the promised land as victory.
Yep.
Be victorious.
Enter this season the way you want to be in this season.
Yeah. So they were able to go into the promised land victorious. They were able to conquer Jericho. They were able to go through these places that looked impossible, that,
Right.
that everyone else, 10 spies said, we can never do that.
Do this.
We can't
They're
do
too
this.
big.
But Joshua said, we can. And God's like, you will. But it's not going to be on your own.
Right.
It's going to be through my might,
Yep.
through my power, my way, not your way.
Yep.
So
Man, it's like a song we sang yesterday.
it is.
Your way's better.
Your way is better. So the last thing I want to go to is I talked about I am not. So
Right.
like for me, it was I felt I am unqualified.
Right.
I am unqualified. I feel like that sometimes I have to like remind myself, but because of Christ, I am called.
Right.
Yeah, I may have the feelings of I'm unqualified at times.
And I mean, honestly, if every single pastor
was honest.
was honest,
Yep. They feel that way.
they've all felt unqualified at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah. And for me, I was like, I don't know what it is for you. Yours is probably I am, you fill in the blank. But because of Christ, I am a child
Yep,
of God.
yep.
I'm a son or daughter, whatever it may be. Like that's, so it's like, what are you? What do you feel like you're not? And but rephrase it. But because of Christ, I am.
Right.
So I think to close out this last sermon recap for this week, what are you not? What's the lie from the devil that's
Right.
shaming you, that you feel like I am not blank, I'm never going to be blank, whatever it may be, then put in because of Christ, I am blank.
Yeah.
Maybe put that in the comment section in the video, or put
Right.
it in your phone.
Yeah,
Remind
yeah.
yourself daily who Christ says you are.
Something else you can do, something that Brittany and I do, is we write things in dry erase markers on the mirrors of our house.
Yeah.
Constant reminders of, like today is the day that someone is giving God another chance. Like we have something like that written on a mirror. We have the God is greater than the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Written on another mirror. And we have these things written all over our mirrors. That way, whenever we go look at ourselves, we're also constantly reminded
Yeah.
at who God says we are and how great God is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're into stuff like that, just put it somewhere put it as the wallpaper on your phone. That way you can't pick your phone up without seeing it.
Yeah.
Put it somewhere where it's constantly going to be in front of your vision.
Yeah.
And man, it will eventually change you.
Yeah. It'll eventually not become not just something you're seeing, but be something that's inside you that you hold on to, that you know is a promise.
That's how, it's how you create culture. That's how you change culture.
Yeah.
Is by constantly reminding yourself of stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you are struggling with shame,
You're not alone.
you're not alone. And God sees you and he loves you.
Yep.
And he says, I paid the price for your shame. You don't need that shame anymore. If you're in me, you are a brand new person. You are a new creation.
Right. And reach out to someone.
Yeah, don't go through it alone.
Yeah.
See, what messed with me was I buried it. I stuffed it down for 6 years.
Yep.
Didn't tell anyone because I thought if I did, my life would change. My calling would be removed. People wouldn't look at me the same that they looked at me before.
Yep.
And once I told somebody, I experienced the love and the grace that Jesus has given me from somebody else.
Yep.
So I just want to encourage you, you're not alone.
Right.
If you're struggling with shame, if you've done something that you feel like it's unforgivable, it is forgivable.
Right.
And we would love to come alongside you, pray with you, help you walk you through this because God wants you to find freedom.
Absolutely. And we've all been there. And it's never okay to try and like shame someone out of their shame.
No.
Like, oh, that's not that bad.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, if they feel that way, it's bad to them.
Yep.
You don't get to pick how bad something is, you know? Like, something that maybe not that bad to you is like killing them on the inside.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
Yep. Just if someone does come to you with their shame, be respectful.
Be respectful. Listen. Don't try to give them all the answers of how they should fix their life.
Right. Just be there to walk it out with them. Some people need some sort of accountability partner, and maybe that's all they need from you is to just check in on them and say, "Hey, you doing good?" And if they say no, say, "All right, well, this is what we said we were going to do if you said no, and this is what we're doing."
Yeah. And be encouraging.
Absolutely.
Don't underestimate if you have a thought to encourage someone, it isn't just a thought from you. That's a thought from God, I believe.
And if you are somebody's accountability partner and they make it a week, celebrate the win. Celebrate the win. And I mean, if they make it a day at the beginning, celebrate the win. That's something that I've always, I know we're kind of like running a little short on time, but that's something that I've always talked about in like the church circle is we forget sometimes that people are baby Christians and we don't celebrate the baby victories.
Well, think about like when we had a baby, like whenever they said their first word, we were
Celebrate
like,
it.
let's go. If it was mama or dad, that we were like, either way, we're super excited they said their
celebrating.
first word, or when they took their first step,
We're celebrating.
we're celebrating.
And sometimes in our circles, we can say, well, why aren't people walking yet?
Yeah.
They got to take the step first. Celebrate the step.
Yep.
Celebrate that first word. Don't get upset that somebody's not speaking full sentences yet. Celebrate the word.
Yeah.
Celebrate the step. Always, always, always celebrate the small victories because those small victories are going to lead into the big ones.
Exactly.
So always celebrate the small victories. And if you're trying to walk that thing out on your own and you've made it a day, man, congratulations.
Yeah.
Keep going. If you've made it a week, keep pushing.
Yep.
like
going.
better days are ahead, man.
Yep.
Keep going.
Yep, for sure.
Yep.
Man, I'm so excited for the rest of this series.
Right.
I believe God, it was something that got laid on my heart, and I understand why He laid it on my heart.
Right.
Just as much as it may be impacting you, it's impacting me.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
as I'm writing the sermons, I'm like, man, I need it. As I'm writing that, man, I needed to hear that.
Right. That's
I'm
a
like,
word for me.
That's a word for me. I'm like,
Right.
come on, like
No, I just
I
get
love
to
how
share
the
it with
Holy
somebody
I
else.
love how the Holy Spirit works like that.
Man,
and
that's
it's so
awesome.
cool.
Yep.
But yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us for what is it, sermon recap number 5 now?
I don't even know.
I
anymore.
lost count.
I'm gonna have to start going to the other hand.
Well, either way, thank you for joining us.
Yep.
We'll see you next Sunday night at service.
Yep.
We'll be talking about bitterness. So it'll be a good message, I
Man,
believe.
don't get bitter.
Don't get better. Get better. Ooh, I might have to put that in my sermon somehow.
There you go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. See you next time.
See you, man.
Protection. It's a hard road to heaven.